All right, thank you very much again for having me. I appreciate the invitation. Again, my name is Harriet Zaidman, and as well as being part of the United Jewish People's Order, it's we said yesterday, it's a secular Jewish group. We're cultural. We work on questions of social justice, but I'm also a lifelong Winnipegger. I'm a retired teacher librarian, and I'm a writer for young people. So I'm going to give you a cook's tour through the history of the Jewish community in Winnipeg, and it mirrors what happened in Canada, except for one very specific event. My grandparents and great-grandparents immigrated to the city between 1905 and 1913. Most people came between 1890 and the First World War. Part of the mass migration of Eastern Europeans. Jews were fleeing pogroms, violent riots, where they were targeted just for being who they were by Cossacks and others in what was then called Russia. My grandparents said they came from Russia, but it was Ukraine, Poland, Lithuania, Moldova, Belarus. It was the Pale of Settlement, where Jews were restricted according to where they could live and what occupations they could take part in. They weren't allowed to own land, for example, so they were forced into occupations of being merchants or tradesmen. That happened from 1791 on. And all this was part of a systematic discrimination by the Russian Orthodox and the Roman Catholic churches, and then, of course, the Protestant churches after. And Jews were buffeted from one country to the other as they were kicked out here, allowed to live here, ghettoized. So this is the, whoops.
Got it.
Is that my clicker?
That's your clicker.
And what do I click, by the way?
That one, I think.
Okay. So that was the situation they lived in. And it came about because when Constantine, the Roman Emperor, converted to Christianity, some people didn't. And so through history, they were othered because they didn't accept Jesus Christ as their Messiah. And they became an identifiable group through the centuries, used as middlemen by monarchies to collect taxes, which made them an identifiable group you didn't want to have anything to do with or you hated. They were blamed for the plague, so communities were, during the Black Death, were drowned, as in Lyon, or burned, as in Strasbourg. The history is pretty miserable, and in Eastern European as well. So what would you do if this was your experience? And Canada came calling and said, "There's no one here on the land." You left. And of course, when they came here, they experienced the same kind of othering, anti-Semitism. Most of the Jews who came here were peasants from shtetls, like little villages, or working class. Yiddish was their common language, but they all spoke Russian, Ukrainian, Polish, and other languages. And they were, not only, for various reasons, they were shuttered to the North End, mostly, like not completely, but they were, directed there. So if you notice things like this, you learn as you go along. I've written a book about the times, and how do you restrict people? Well, you tell people that they can vote if they own land, but if you only own a property that's 24 feet wide, you can't. They had to be 26 feet wide, and this is a way of restricting people further. So the North End had these smaller properties, so it was a good way of keeping power. But anyway, my grandparents and great-grandparents came here to give us a better life, as did Harold's and others. And Selkirk Avenue, if you knew it when I grew up and before, was a vibrant area. It was busy, and it was a commercial center. And some families moved to small towns where they established general stores, and some, fulfilling the dream that they could finally own land and become farmers, joined cooperative movements and established farming colonies. Some in Manitoba, mostly in Saskatchewan, and a few in Alberta, but this happened all over the world, and there's a history behind that. And many of those didn't last because of people wanted an urban experience as society changed, but some did and lasted into the 60s and 70s. In the community of Winnipeg, the community was completely a myriad of people. Some people were religious, and just because of custom. And if you came from a shtetl where everything was the same for 200, 300 years, you did the same thing and you had the same beliefs, but not necessarily. And people often followed rituals just because of custom. There were a lot of synagogues, some related to the towns people left behind because so many people came from each town, there were enough. Some were related to the different occupations, such as a butcher shop, butchers. There were a lot of kosher butchers. My great uncle had one, but my family didn't keep kosher. It was just a whole polyglot of people, and it didn't seem to matter. That's of course between there's always rivalries or whatever, but it was not these were not defining features. There were many community organizations, of course. There were political organizations of every shape, and in the 1900s to the 1940s, the political world was very charged. So you had Bundists, labor Zionists, Social Democrats, socialists, communists, radicals, anarchists. You had every kind of different group, and they merged and swayed and things like this. There was sort of constant conversation, constant discussion. So that's what Winnipeg was like. And the city, as that community grew, Winnipeg was about 40,000 people in 1900, and it grew to 180,000 in 1919. And 1919 was a defining year for anybody who doesn't know, who is Canadian. You should know about 1919 because Winnipeg in that year changed your life. Even today, even if you weren't born here. Because during the First World War, people came here. 85% of people in Winnipeg were immigrants. 5% were new Canadians, they were born here, but the other 10% were people who'd been here for 1 to 2 generations. They were the, mostly Anglo elite who moved from Ontario, the sons and daughters, but sons of the established Anglo elite who moved from Ontario to continue building their world here. And they're the ones who are responsible for the big banks on Main Street, things like that. And they owned the factories, things like that. They employed people, but at cruelly poor wages. When the First World War started, the federal government froze wages, but they did not freeze prices. Prices rose about 65%. It cost a family about $1,500 to live at that time, but the average wage was $900. There was enormous poverty. If you were a child under 5, your chance of dying was greater in Winnipeg than anywhere else in the English-speaking world. Winnipeg. It's interesting, not Manitoba, but in Winnipeg. Of course, until March 1919, there was no running water, there was no sewage. So in the clay soil we have here that goes up and down with the seasons, you had tremendous leaking of outhouses. You had a great spread of diseases. There were a lot of epidemics of typhus and dysentery and all these, and leading to a very high death rate. Finally, in March 1919, it was one of the last big cities. We were the third biggest city in Canada. We finally had sewage. So this is what was happening. People were getting poorer and poorer. The rich were getting richer and richer because when you're feeding the war effort, there's no end to the demand, and you could charge whatever you wanted for the materials. But comes the end of the First World War, you had, and my grandparents were there. My 2 grandmothers, one was 40, she was a garment worker. The other one was 14, she was a garment worker. Okay, so the situation that ended up after the First World War was that you had mass layoffs competing for wages, and you had returning soldiers coming home after the horror of World War I and saying, lost their youth, where is a job? I did this for you. And so there were strikes. This was happening everywhere across Canada. There were a massive number of strikes, 350 in 1918 alone across the country. So comes Winnipeg in 1919, and workers were getting organized. But so were the owners. And some of the history of the vicious, cruel oppression and suppression of workers' struggles is like eye-popping. And they were talking to each other. They were helping each other out across the continent, okay, because this was happening in the U.S. as well. On May 1st, 1919, and just so I'll just show you, this is what pictures from 1919. I don't know if I'm going the right way. These are how people lived, okay? You had coal, and this is how my family lived. Coal, stoves, very, very cheap coal, very unhealthy conditions, lovely in minus 30 weather here. So that's how Winnipeggers lived. This is a typical working conditions for women. Those are single pane windows. You could imagine how cold it was in winter and completely stifling and in summer and dangerous. It's a powder keg, of course. And it was all piecework. This is how the better half lived. They did not work in the garment factories. And so I like to show this. Anybody know where this is in any Winnipeggers? Hands up. 529 Wellington. It's now a restaurant. It was the home of, the man's name was Ashdown. He had the largest hardware store in Winnipeg. And Winnipeg was a city being built, so he was quite wealthy. He was a member of what was called the Committee of 1,000, the businessmen, the politicians who formed. It was about 100 people who never revealed themselves. There were about 3 names known, 3 or very few names known. They destroyed all the minutes of their meetings, but they were the power behind the government and business and organized to crush the strike. This is the Central Strike Committee. On May 1st, the tradesmen, metal workers went out on strike for better wages and working conditions. And they got nowhere. The Committee of 1,000 organized and said, don't negotiate, don't give not one word of conversation. And they didn't. On May 15th, they took a vote among the 11,000 unionized workers in Winnipeg. And it was like a 10,954 and 50 against. It was incredibly unanimous. They called a general strike, except about 30 to 35,000 people walked out because the poverty was so great that no one could bear it. And a strike committee of workers formed. There's 2 women on it. These were tradesmen, carpenters, machinists, electrical workers at the time. So they were quite different, as opposed to the Committee of 1,000, these are young men, like in their 20s to 35, and mostly British. There was actually one Jewish man on there. His name was A. Heaps. He was British, but they came from the working class in England, because of course there was division and racism among the working people too, but they did not have the experience of governing as the other people did, who were already politicians, who had already came from experienced families and things like that. So there they were, and they had to run the city, and they did pretty well. They organized things. They did some clever things. They said to the police and health workers, "Stay on the job. Let's keep it." But I wrote a book. I'll just show you. Oh. This is a middle years novel. It's called City on Strike, and it's about the experience of children, how children experience it. Because of course, as you know, it's not adults who not these events that just happen, but it's how it affects you. So this is the experience of children. And on May 15th, the whole city basically shut down. These people were left to govern it. There was no negotiations at all. Okay, the Central Strike, the Committee of 1,000, there was huge demonstrations. The returning soldiers mostly marched down Main Street and other streets to demand jobs, demand negotiations, and there were none. So in order to counter the very what they called the threat of the strikers, the Committee of 1,000 organized their own people. Deport the undesirable alien. Of course, you were quite welcome to come here and work and starve yourself to death, but you suddenly became an alien. Down with Bolshevism. They had a newspaper that they gave out free, and they spread rumors that 4 Bolsheviks had crossed the ocean foment revolution, and it was all going to start in Canada, in Winnipeg, and overthrow the government. It was pretty disgusting. But of course, it was to drive a wedge between the groups of people. I've missed something. Okay, so there was no violence actually. The city was ridiculously calm because the strike committee said, don't let yourself become provoked. But on June 10th, what the city did was they fired all the policemen because the policemen wouldn't sign an oath not to join a union. So they knew this would happen. This was all a plan. So they fired them all, and they hired a bunch of thugs, their own sons, some returned soldiers, but whoever they could get. They paid them $6 a day, I believe it was, which was huge. Policemen only got $5 a day. And they gave them a truncheon as well as a badge, a little band to say, but they gave them a truncheon, a pipe, something to whack people. And from June 10th on, these people went out and were given free rein to go and attack people. And so the tension began. And there were some other events I'll skip over, but the Committee of 1,000 knew how that they were maneuvering. On the 15th of June, there was the weather had been viciously hot, and a prairie person knows what viciously hot weather is. For about 8 weeks, there had been not a drop of rain. On the night of the 15th, I think it was, some enormous windstorm, the damage to homes, it looks like a tornado came through the city, and people's homes were completely destroyed. And you consider that people had no money left. They didn't have money to begin with. There were some soup kitchens that had opened by the women who were on the organizing committee, and they had no money to go and repair their homes. They had no savings. People had no savings. So then the night after that, the Committee of 1,000 and the police went out and arrested the main strike leaders overnight, took them to the prison, Stony Mountain, north of the city, and destroyed the labor temple that was where they organized, smashed everything, took documents, and on the way, to the prison, they went and smashed the Ukrainian labor temple, arrested whoever was in there and the Jewish Liberty Temple, and arrested the people in there and smashed it, just to strike terror in people's hearts. The Jewish community, for the most part, took part in, because they were just working class, really poor working class, took part in the strike, but did not play any leadership roles. There were 2 men from the Jewish community on the Committee of 1,000 who later, they both had some positions of authority, but later were roundly defeated whenever they tried to run for election again. It was pretty sound. But on pardon me, I'm even forgetting my dates, June 21st, the Minister of Labor was going to be in Winnipeg, from the Canadian government. The returning soldiers said they were going to march down Main Street, demanding, a solution to this. But the mayor read the Riot Act and said, no one can be on the streets, go home. People defied it, and they lined up. What they used to do was line up. Okay, anyway, what happened was the Mounties came. First of all, they drove a streetcar up, and if you go in front of the Pantages theater in Winnipeg, you'll see a monument to this. But they tipped over this streetcar because they were strike breakers. But then Mounties came out and attacked the strikers with they attacked them, killed 2 people, and then they brought out there's where people this I forgot is the wrong order. This is how people used to gather. Where the Centennial Concert Hall is now was a park. People used to gather trying to get information about the strike. There was none, but they gathered every day. This is anyway. This is what. And then on June 21st, they then brought out the thugs, the specials, who then attacked everybody and injured a great number of people. And pardon me, that's it. But that was the strike. That was the seminal event, and because it was defeated. because it was defeated, wages and the working conditions were held back in Winnipeg and in Canada and in North America. And it was old, and then my father described their life as impoverished in the 20s, destitute in the 30s, until the 1940s, when suddenly the government liked you because you could go off to war and die for them. You know, suddenly people's lives went up. But as to the Jewish community, I'm sorry, I'm usually pretty good about following things. It galvanized the Jewish community, the strike. It made them feel more determined to want to overcome things. And before the World War II, the majority of people in my family and my community quit school by grade 8 or 9 to go out and support their families. It was a divided city. You know, you had to answer until the 1970s. You had to be aware that someone's going to say, "What are you?" Not "Who are you?" "What are you?" You know, it was pretty disgusting. And anti-Semitism was pervasive. The Nazi movement was active here in the 30s. In the field of education, my parents were regularly told they were inferior because of who they were. In employment, you were discriminated. Eaton's, the big famous department store, wouldn't put Jews, you couldn't be a clerk. You had to work in the back. I have stories about my parents, and my father worked for the railway, so he was often called a Christ killer, you know, these lovely stereotypes, things like that. When I was a kid, I used to have a kid run in front of me and he'd go, "Heil Hitler," all the time. You know, he grew up to be a Nazi, and I made him a character who was almost unredeemable in my next book, but I gave him a sliver of a chance. You couldn't live in certain areas, not because the property, because you couldn't afford it, because the community wouldn't sell you property in Tuxedo and at Victoria Beach, if you know that. But despite that, people yearned to learn and contribute. And I'm going to give you these examples. The Mount Carmel Clinic, if you live in Winnipeg, was a health clinic started for immigrant Jews by volunteer doctors, supported by the community, because the people were in such bad health, you had to pay for health, then. And it still runs today, and it is a community clinic that is of great renown. Those people who were able to go to school worked in the fields of education and social work to improve accessibility. People discovered that Slavics, Jews and Slavs, were not being allowed into medical school. There were quotas on them. They overcame that so they could contribute to the field of medicine. Medicare, you might have heard of that, was designed by North End Jews because the Saskatchewan government recruited these people from the North End Jewish community who were prominent in their field, and they went to Saskatchewan and they designed what became the basis for Medicare. Adele Wiseman broke the Anglo glass ceiling in the field of literature, North End Winnipegger, and won the Governor General's Medal for Literature in 1956. John Hirsch, Holocaust survivor, teenage Holocaust survivor, came here, and a member of my extremely extended family, started the Manitoba Theatre Centre. Sybil Shack, another member of my family, renowned educator in the 1960s and 70s, wrote books and was everywhere. So it's a community that has contributed widely. It is, I would say the 1967 war was one sort of important thing in pushing people to take a side, to support Israel in some senses. McCarthyism in the 50s put a stop to people's questioning political activities because people were targeted. The UJPO that I belonged to, they had dossiers on everybody. The RCMP had dossiers on everybody. So that's the community as it changed, and why you have people who cleave to, some people who cleave to the values that I've espoused: progress in society, unity, social justice, and why you have people who, for the reasons that, because of the way you were brought up, cleave to others. I'm sorry to have taken so long. I'm sorry to have taken
Before I begin, I just want to thank whoever put the program together for the very flattering bio of me, but I do have to make one small correction. I'm the past chair of the IJV National Steering Committee. Okay. So good afternoon. My name is Harold Schuster, and I'm an organizer with Independent Jewish Voices here in Winnipeg. IJV is an anti-Zionist organization that opposes all forms of racism and advocates for justice and peace for all in Palestine. We believe that no one should have to choose between embracing Judaism or Jewishness and supporting Palestinian rights. We are part of a growing community of Jews in Canada and across the globe who do not believe that Israel is the nucleus of Judaism. We are Jews who are unyoked from the burden of Zionism. We can celebrate the true joys of what Judaism can be when it is not centered on Israel. We refuse to allow our trauma to be used to traumatize others. I want to begin by thanking Islamic Social Services Association for inviting me to speak today. I'm going to thank all of you in advance for giving of your time to listen to what we have to say. And of course, a big thank you to Auntie Shahina. I've heard it said that when Auntie calls, you don't say no. Usually gets a bit of a laugh because the implication is that Auntie is not one to be messed with. And that's true, but it's true in a very good way. You say yes when Auntie calls out of a deep sense of gratitude and respect and admiration and love. Auntie Shahina is the type of person we should all aspire to be someday, and when she asks you to do something, you know it is important and will be meaningful, and so you say yes. So why should you give your valuable time to listen to me? My hope is that what I have to say will give you a new understanding of what it can mean to be Jewish. You may be hearing a different perspective on the relationship of Jews to Israel. You will learn that for many Jews, there is no contradiction between being Jewish and standing in solidarity with Palestine. You will learn that Jews do not speak with one voice because there is no single Jewish identity. We are not a monolithic people. We cover the political spectrum from communist to conservative. We cover the religious spectrum from atheist to ultra-Orthodox, and to speak in those terms of there being a single Jewish voice or any other religious or cultural group is both dangerous and wrong. And finally, I hope you will come to appreciate how, for me, with my understanding of what it means to be a Jew, compels me to be an ally with Palestinians, to stand in solidarity with Ramsey, even if he's not here, and his family and all Palestinians who are seeking justice and peace and the right to return to their homeland, to what we all hope will soon be the country of Palestine. So who am I? I was born and raised in Beausejour, Manitoba, where we were one of 5 Jewish families, all related to one another in some way. We kept a mostly kosher household. We celebrated the Jewish holidays. My mom lit candles on Shabbat. At 13, I had a bar mitzvah. We traveled to Winnipeg to synagogue for the high holidays. There was always a blue and white J&F tin in our kitchen, although I don't ever remember putting money in it. I was always aware of the fact that I was a Jew, but being Jewish was not a part of my identity. I didn't feel different. I didn't look different. Everybody in my town at that time was some shade of white. Religion never played a role in my life, and I was not guided morally or spiritually by a strict adherence to the teachings of the Torah, the Jewish Bible. If you were to judge my Jewishness by my adherence to the 612 mitzvahs, the 248 do's, and the 365 don'ts that guide every aspect of Jewish life, I would say I was Jewish adjacent. It was only later in my life that being Jewish became a part of my identity. And my Jewishness lies in the history of our people, the lessons taught and learnt through our own oppression, and how we can use those lessons to guide our actions and behavior today. My identity is not about a piece of land in the Middle East, but about the land I live on here in Canada, on Turtle Island, and how I live my life on this land. I find more value and guidance on how to be not just a Jew, but a good person, a mensch in Yiddish, in the prophetic teachings of Jewish scholars than through a strict adherence to a set of rules. There are two fundamental Jewish teachings that guide my thinking and action. The first is Tikkun Olam, or repairing the world. This principle tells us that we should always strive to do good. It is meant to guide our relations with each other and the earth, so that when we leave this world, it should be a little better than when we arrived. The second teaching is the concept of tzedakah. The literal translation from Hebrew is charity or philanthropy. The roots of the word, however, mean justice, and it is meant to motivate Jews to do what is right and what is just. A third major influence in who I am comes from a unique opportunity I had in my mid-20s, and I spent 31 months traveling around the world, literally going east to west. I left Canada and arrived in Casablanca, Morocco on Christmas Day in 1983. Could give you an idea of how old I am. And returned to Canada from Hong Kong via Seattle on July 31st, 1986. I spent time in 25 different countries, most of which were at the time referred to as third world or developing countries. As a privileged white kid, this was life-changing. Seeing, and to whatever extent possible, understanding the conditions under which most of the rest of the world lives and how our understanding of normal is anything but. My blissful ignorance of the world was shattered. My time spent traveling through those impoverished countries profoundly moved me and set me on a path to understand how our world came to be so divided. I went to university, I studied politics, and came to understand that the basis of the disparity between rich and poor lies in colonialism, and the racist roots of settler colonialism, which laid the foundation for the discovery of Canada, set the stage for the division between the haves and the have-nots, between the settlers and indigenous people of this land, between the Jewish settlers and indigenous Palestinians, the colonizers and the colonized. So with my university degree and some life experience, I began my pursuit to change the world. Began with a focus on social and economic and environmental justice, and now my attention is on Palestine. My focus on Palestine came as a result of coming to a new and exciting understanding of Judaism and how to live my life as a Jew. One that was not focused on strict adherence to Jewish law, but grounded in the prophetic teachings. When my son was born, I wanted to find a way to help him understand the Jewish side of who he was, and I knew it was not going to be through a synagogue. And thankfully, I found a secular humanist Jewish organization called the Shalom Aleichem Community. Through my involvement with them, I also learned a new and different way of being Jewish, a way based on how we can take the stories of our past to help us better understand the world today and use them to create change, a way that is guided by those teachings of Tikkun Olam and Tzedakah. It was through this community that I learned about Palestine and independent Jewish voices. And it saddens and shames me that it took so long for me to come to fully understand how what Israel was doing, its ethnic cleansing of Palestine, its attempts to erase any trace of Palestinian existence on that land, what was being done in my name to make me safe. And I wanted no part of that. We were guided by the teachings that when we see discrimination, witness or understand power imbalances, inequality, while it is not our task to end the fight, we must enter the fight, and we certainly had skin in this game. This was a point in my life when I came face to face with what Omar el-Akkad in the must-read book, One Day, Everyone Will Always Have Been Against This, describes as the moral component of history. The most necessary component is simply a single question asked over and over again. When it mattered, who sided with justice and who sided with power? And I was going to side with justice. As anti-Zionist Jews, we needed to do more than simply distance ourselves from the institutional Jewish narrative. We needed to put forward an independent Jewish voice that said as loud and forcefully as we could that we wanted no part of what they were doing. we were saying, "Not in our name." We rejected the idea that for us as Jews to be safe, we needed our own country. We were stating very clearly that we wanted no part in the Zionist experiment. Zionism is the political ideology developed in the early 1900s. It was based on what I think is the false understanding that anti-Semitism was so widespread at that time that the only way for Jews to be safe, to live their lives as Jews, free from bigotry and discrimination, was if they lived apart from the rest of the world in their own country. Part of the anti-Semitism of that time was happening in Russia, where pogroms, as Harriet talked about, or the mass expulsions were forcing Jews to flee Tsarist Russia. It was those pogroms that forced my great-grandparents to leave and come to Canada. And I find it a bit ironic that the proposed solution to the anti-Semitism my great-grandparents faced is now the focus of my political organizing and what I spend my time fighting against. For the past 77 years, since 1948, Israel and its supporters around the world have celebrated its founding and Independence Day. I find no joy or cause for celebration in an action that caused so much trauma and suffering for Palestinians. The Nakba, the catastrophe, is the flip side of Israel's Declaration of Independence, and it is marked every May 15th. And it needs to be understood as both an event and an ongoing process. The date marks the completion of the Zionist goal of establishing an ethnic Jewish state, but the process was set in place many years before that and continues to this day. It is a process of replacing Palestine with Israel, replacing Arab Palestinians with Jews. The logic that led to the Nakba continues to be the logic that guides Israeli society today, a logic that is being live streamed to our screens in the genocide in Gaza. And the more I read, the more I question, the more I learned and came to understand the truth about what was happening in Palestine, the harder and harder it was for me to be silent. I came to understand that Israel was never a land with no people for a people with no land, and it certainly wasn't a vast desert needing colonizers to make it bloom. It was a land with a rich and vibrant culture, and a land that was being cultivated and harvested with indigenous knowledge that would ensure its sustainability for future generations. And from those two foundational lies, we have been fed a constant pack of lies, lies that Halifax IJV writer Judy Haven has called deliberate, filthy, and deadly. We have catastrophe after catastrophe after catastrophe. And when I learnt that the creation of Israel, a Jewish majority state, which was meant to be a refuge for me to escape anti-Semitism, required the ethnic cleansing of over 750,000 Palestinians, I could not sit quietly and do nothing. It was no longer a question of just trying to distance myself from the institutional Jewish narrative. I needed to find a way to put Tikkun Olam into practice, because there was some major repairing that needed to be made. And speaking out has not been made easy. The major Jewish institutions in this city and across this country have laid a false claim that when they speak for all Jews. By claiming to speak for me, they have taken away my voice and the voice of others like mine. They are denying us the self-determination that they claim to be fighting so hard to obtain for Israel. And when we do speak, we are vilified, we are marginalized. We not only have our Jewishness questioned and challenged, they attempt to deny us any Jewish identity at all. We are traitors. We are the ones making other Jews feel unsafe. And for all the attempts to silence, intimidate, or threaten us, it has been even harder for Palestinian voices to be heard. But as the world comes to learn the truth about Israel's mistreatment of Palestinians, about Israel's ongoing violations of international and human rights laws, our voices have grown in strength and number and diversity. More importantly, though, the voices of Palestinians are beginning to be heard. Palestinians are being given the space to tell their truths and to have their experiences affirmed. All the attempts at their erasure, through the deliberate destruction of towns and villages, of homes and institutions, The attempts to try and hide the history of Palestine have failed. And as Palestinians continue their steadfast pursuit of justice and peace, knowing what I know of the harms done to them in my name, when they put out a call to take to the streets, I will be there. And I will do so willingly, not out of a sense of guilt, but because it is the right thing to do. We are told as Jews, when we witness acts of evil and do nothing to try and stop evil, we are complicit in those acts. And through my understanding of what it means to be Jewish, of how to be in relation with others and to always seek justice, I feel a duty and responsibility to use whatever platform I have, with all the privilege that was bestowed upon me, to act in solidarity and to give voice to those who our society attempts to silence. My belief in the universal nature of human rights means I must speak out against injustices, no matter who the victim, no matter who the perpetrator, and to always stand on the side of the oppressed and never with the oppressor. We cannot allow ourselves to be divided or silenced in our struggle for equality. We cannot allow for the privileging of suffering. Only if we allow ourselves to be silenced will those seeking to maintain the status quo enjoy their power to the fullest. Racial violence and discrimination, no matter who the victim or who the perpetrator, must be confronted with equal force and determination. We recognize that for us to feel safe and secure in our lives, for our children to not know fear and bigotry, our fight to end anti-Semitism must be part of an overall fight to end all forms of racism and discrimination, for we are tied to each other in a united fight against ignorance and to recognize our mutual humanity. I'll end with a quote from the American writer and Black activist James Baldwin. Baldwin's work helped to raise public awareness of racial and sexual oppression. His honest betrayal of his personal experiences in a national context challenged America to uphold the values it promised on equality and justice. He wrote, "You think your pain and your heartbreak are unprecedented in the history of the world, but then you read." So I encourage you all to read, to ask questions, and to seek justice. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Okay, so my name is Basil. I'm from Winnipeg. I found out I'm doing this about half an hour ago, and I think I'm the last speaker out of the panel. So, yeah, looking at the lineup that we've had the past 2 days, it does put me under a bit of pressure seeing all these masters, PhDs, guys that have years and years of experience, and I get thrown up here. I'm still, fresh out. So I'll do my best, inshallah. But subhanallah, they say that God puts people where they need to be at the right time, right place, right? And it's just interesting to me how Harriet happened to talk about the past 100 years ago, and then from there you can see Harold was talking about the past, but a little more recent and moving on towards now. And my talk is gonna focus a little more on the future. So it just worked out perfectly, and it's a little fascinating, So I'll talk a little about myself. I'm more of a storyteller. I don't like to try to give you guys a takeaway. I'd rather if you can just feel something out of my story, have something that stays with you, that's enough for me. So, born and raised here. My origins are from Gaza. So my dad is Ghazawi. Mom's from a city by Jerusalem. So it's Palestine through and through. But I was born here. And the man you see standing before you, are, I guess, kid considering the room, but it's really interesting. Like if you'd met me 5 years ago, you would have seen somebody completely different. So my story starts, I'd say about 2017, 2016. My friends used to always tell me, you need to, learn to be more human, learn empathy, learn to feel things for others, because I was very introverted, very, I don't want to be out there, I don't want to meet these people. And so this story is more so about how I got from there to being comfortable getting thrown up here half an hour before I'm up here and just going with the flow. And it starts about really the main change was 3 years ago. Because like I said, Palestinian, born and raised here. My family is in Jordan, Amman. And I've never been to Palestine except once in my life. And that's when my life, I would say, did a full 180. So I'd say 3 years ago, around mid-August, we went there for 4 or 5 days. Up until that point, we didn't think we could go because, like I said, my father's from Gaza. And the Ghazawis have a unique status among Palestinians where nothing gets in, nothing gets out, open-air prison. So we ended up going without my dad. It was just me, my older brother, my younger sister, and my mother. And we went on the Canadian citizenship. So, you know, like Hassan was saying, you go in there and you say you're here for tourism. And it works once, twice, 3 times as long as you're not doing it too close by. So I won't be able to visit for, well, it's been 3 years. But if I go visit again, then once again you'd have to wait, right? So it is just as tough as they tell you. You do get questioned. They hold you up there. They can take your phone. They can strip search you. They can do whatever you want. But what was especially fascinating to me is when you go down there, because we took the bridge, there is a border crossing from Jordan as opposed to flying in. And when you do that, you get to see the whole place. So you start from the border with Jordan and you move in towards the middle. As you're driving through, every time you pass from the Palestinian side to the Israeli side, there's military grade checkpoints. And they say military grade, but it feels like a prison. So there's those circular things, it's the steel bars, you have to pass through them, you give them your phone, you give them your everything. They pat you down, they have every right to turn you back. Keep in mind, they can turn you back at the border, they can turn you back in these checkpoints, they can turn you back wherever. And the whole point of this trip was honestly to go see Masjid al-Aqsa, third holiest site in Islam, right? And it was just as gorgeous as they say. But the trip there, you do see, as you're driving there, you can see the apartheid wall. You can see the military checkpoints. You can see the treatment that you're given. Every time you want to go to pray at the masjid, they actually would ask me to recite Surah Al-Fatiha to prove that I'm Muslim. As soon as you bring out the Canadian passport, there's almost a switch. It's like, oh yeah, I'm Canadian, I'm a tourist, I'm coming to see here. And the treatment switches. So you can see it's quite honestly very different than what you'd expect, right? But that aside, if anyone were to go on a trip like this, I'm sure it'd be life-changing. So where I'm trying to go with this is more so that the thing that changed me isn't the fact that I went to Palestine, it's the fact that I went and I left my house and I went and I did something. And so we talk about allyship and we see there's unfortunately a divide in a lot of communities. There's been a narrative that's pushed onto Palestinians and the Jewish community as well, that by birthright we need to be enemies. And as we all know, that's just something that's pushed onto us by people that are most likely neither Palestinian nor Jewish. And so how do we address that? How do we fight it as a community, as a collective? Is simply, I'll refer to the seerah. I'm not much of a scholar, so I'll just give a bit of a story. If we look at the prophetic tradition, the seerah of the Rasul ﷺ, you see that it was very common for the Rasul, may peace and blessings be upon him, he would go down into the market, he would go on trips, he was a merchant, he would fight in battles. So we can see very clearly he lived amongst the people. Nowadays we have a lot of people that instead they stay at home and they do ibadah, which is, it's great, right? But the prophetic tradition is to live with the people, to go out, to see the world, to experience things. And then the question is naturally, what benefit does that bring? When you go out there, when you communicate with others, you learn things about yourself, you learn things about them. So I remember a long time growing up, even in Winnipeg, the Palestinian community had that idea that all Jews are Zionists. And then you go out and you talk to people, you meet people like Harold and Harriet, and you see, the world is not the place that people make it out to be. People are different, and it's really just, I can sit here and tell you guys that naturally, but I can tell you fire is hot. For a kid that's never been burnt, for a kid that's never touched a stovetop, they don't know what hot means. They don't know what it means to be burnt. So that's the idea here, is to essentially just throw yourself in there and experience things. And that just, the funny thing is it's all interconnected, subhanAllah. You experience these things, you see that no one's free till we're all free. That's something they say a lot in the movement. And it's this idea that, once again, you throw yourself in there, you learn from people, you meet people, you expand your worldview, and you start to see that it really is a thing, that no one is free until we're all free. Because at the end of the day, you stand with Palestine because what's happening is not right. If Palestine was to carry out a genocide, I can say 95% of the people at least here would stand against Palestine. Because that's what we're taught, to stand with what is correct, what is moral, what is just, not to stand with our people. And so these are all things, once again, no one is free until we're all free. That's an idea it stems off this idea of understanding, mutual tolerance. It's something we learn by going out there, you know? And so I guess all of this is really just to say that from a kid who had a lot of resentment for the world, was afraid of the world, didn't like people, the change was just to go out experience. I know it's a little funny that I'm younger than people and telling them to go out and see things. This is more so advice for the few people that are younger than me in this room or around my age. But one of the brothers was asking me, he was asking Hassan actually, I was just there. But I waited anyways. He was saying, how do I get good at public speaking like you? And Hassan was telling him, you just go do it, you know? You have to get those repetitions. Just put yourself in the fire. So it's that concept that you do it and you do it and you do it again and again and again and again until it's second nature. And it's the same thing with people. You're gonna have thoughts about certain people, certain groups. It's human nature, it's bias, right? There's internal bias that you can't remove. But once you interact with them, you're naturally negating that bias. So all in all, it's just to say that, like, at any age, you guys are older than me and most of you, and that's okay. You still go out, go experience things, go talk to people. The reason I come to these things is for that reason. Like Khat Shaheen is a great thing, Allahumma barik, of getting us all to have a place to connect, to meet each other. And so to take that a step further, since I'd assume most people here already do that, I encourage you all as well to go push the people around you as well. I've been trying to push my brother to come to these events. Hamza over there is smiling because he met my brother yesterday. The guy does not come out. But it's the idea that it's step by step, it's mutual, to experience things and to push others to also experience things. And to do so in a way where we all move together collectively. And quite frankly, Palestine it's a double-edged sword. It's saddening to see, but it's also inspiring that someone the other day said Palestine is the one thing that unites all of the Muslims. And it's a little frustrating because we should be united to begin with. But it's also inspiring that, you know what, there is a chance to be united. And then you can take that further and you can look at people that also aren't Palestinian, aren't Muslim. And you can see the way this qadiyya, this whole issue is uniting all of mankind. It's on the basis of mutual understanding, and that's it. So what do? We push towards that, we move together, don't leave anyone behind. And once we get to that point where everyone's on that same page, inshallah, just overnight, Palestine will be free. It was the same thing with Syria. Overnight, all at once it flipped, right? And Khalid talked about that a little. I remember I was in the masjid the day the news was announced. And it was, subhanAllah, you could see 10, 12, 14-year-old kids coming downstairs crying. And they don't understand what's going on, some of them. Like, they're telling me, like, oh, I've never been, I don't know, like, the actual extent of it. But it's the joy of just knowing that somebody else gets to taste that freedom. It's something I can't put into words, so I'm not even going to bother trying. But I'm sure you can all imagine. So then, all in all, is just to say, how do we get there? We help each other. We push each other to do better. We mentor the youth. We just come together as a community to tolerate each other and to accept and love. And that's all. Thank you.